Howdy, and welcome to LeeReads, where I talk about the books I've been reading and enjoying lately. A little while back, someone in my comments said, why don't you do a video of your top favorite books? So today, that's what I'm doing with my pal, look out here, who's in my lap as normal. I want to spend a few minutes talking about some of my favorite books. The qualifiers here are that they are ones that I've read multiple times, most of them in different formats. So these are the first things I thought of when I imagined what are my favorite books. They're ones that I've turned back to time and time again. In no favoritism order, I stacked my books up here as I pulled them off my bookshelf from, the biggest at the bottom and the smallest at the top. So I'm just going to pull off the pile. So they're in physical copy size order, and the first one's not very pretty. Drawn by Kate Elliott. You can see the spine there. This is one where one of my dogs in the past got a hold of it and chewed the cover off, and I've never replaced it. This is just my old beloved copy, but I also tend to reread it on ebook and soon audiobook. It is what I like to call a science fiction fantasy hybrid, where it's truly science fiction, but the majority of the setting and the world that we're in feels like fish out of water fantasy, where the main character, Tess, is fleeing some heartbreak. She is actually the sister and heir to the Duke of the humans collection of planets in this greater alien empire that sort of incorporated them. And in the past, her brother Charles tried to lead a rebellion against them and failed, and yet for some reason they still let him have this dukedom. She's kind of running from some things in her life and goes down to one of these interdicted planets and winds up discovering that these aliens who aren't supposed to be on the planet are there, and investigates what in the world they think they're doing. She gets also integrated and wrapped up in some world level, region level politics, given a somewhat temporary home on this mission in one of the Drawn tribes. There are traveling people who are following a man with a mission on his own. That's where the story goes. It's the first book in a quartet, and I've not even read the other three because I'm so happy and fulfilled by this one, but I will read the other ones one day. Makes me think a lot. The first time I read it, I thought a lot about the power structures that she's developed within these novels. Next, The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. It just makes me feel good to go back and revisit the two rivers, Perrin, Rand, Mat, Egwene, and Nynaeve, as they're starting off on what becomes very much a grand adventure. They all feel so much more naive, but it's really laying the foundation and the groundwork for the political and magical events that will follow. Very classic quest feeling, travel, adventure style fantasy with world building and magic that was at the time very groundbreaking. This is one that I read for the first time back in high school and have since then reread it and listened to the audiobook of it many times. So it's definitely a comfort read for me. Something of a little bit of a different flavor, a historical romance by Susanna Kearsley. I had a hard time picking which of her novels would be my favorite. They are all different, but she really has her foot in novels that are romantic, suspenseful, have some sort of speculative fiction aspect or paranormal aspect that links a present day story with a story from the past. In this particular story, our heroine from the current time, she's autistic. She winds up taking a job in France to decipher this journal that a historical fiction author wants to use as a primary source for a novel he's writing. As she's deciphering the journal, we start to get into that story, the historical subplot, which has to do with Jacobite rebellions back in the early 1700s, I believe, set in France, but also these characters are kind of traveling a bit. And the historical side is following Mary as she starts out doing a simple job of pretending to be someone's sister for a cover story. And of course, the events that are unfolding are much more convoluted than that, and ends up basically having to flee for her life and try to help the Jacobites succeed in this mission. I love the way the two stories interweave. Both the main characters appeal to me for different reasons. Autistic sort of representation from the contemporary main character, and then Mary, the historical heroine's feeling of abandonment and loneliness and the things that she's going through. Like, I cried when I read this for each of them for different reasons. I was just very much touched by the characters in these stories. And also, Susanna Kearsley always does a really great romance. This would be a really nice place to start if you don't know where to start with Susanna Kearsley. This one I won't spend too much time talking about, but it is The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. It's another one that I tend to read every year or every other year, especially in the autumn. Whenever it starts getting cool outside, that is when I want to bust out my audiobook version of The Fellowship of the Ring and go on this quest with Frodo and the other hobbits and the rest of the Fellowship as the weather is getting colder. I think we all know what The Lord of the Rings is about. It follows the main character Frodo as he inherits this magical ring that the Dark Lord is searching for, and he goes on a mission to destroy it before it can destroy him. Legendary at this point for the world building that he's created. Another very beloved story. A newer favorite, but I've talked about it on this channel before. If you've been watching me for a little while, you may not be surprised. Dark of the West by Joanne Hathaway. It is the first book in the Glass Alliance trilogy. This trilogy is so well done. It's kind of like World War I in a historical setting. So it's a made-up world, but it's very political. We have the old world, the monarchies that are clashing with the general of this other country. About a dozen or so years ago, led an uprising in his own country to bring democracy and, freedom from the monarchs, and starts expanding from there, which is really threatening the political power dynamics of, vast swaths of the civilized world. But the main story is following one of the sons of that general, Ethan, who is a pilot in their country's military, but he doesn't want to fight. And the daughter of one of the monarchies, their parents and their countries are entering a very cautious, kind of untrusty alliance with each other, born out of necessity and other plotting. And they are set to sort of spy on one another. A relationship grows between them instead. And while this first book feels the most young adult, the scope and the depth of the rest of the trilogy as this war builds, this is a book that I think adults and young adults can appreciate. There is so much character building and character growth and things that these characters are struggling with within their families, within their alliances, with their nation, allies, betrayals. It's the whole trilogy is so good. And the first two books are an audiobook. I would love it if they made an audiobook for the third. But lately I've been thinking, it's about time for me to pick this up again, because it's one that I want to revisit every year or so. We are getting there. I'm going to mention one that I don't have the physical books for right now, because I'm basically letting anyone who wants to borrow them, because I want everyone to read these books, which are the Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells. These are a series of novellas with one full-length novel so far that follows a sec unit who has named itself Murderbot, as it is protecting some scientists that are visiting this planet, do some research surveys, but the flora and fauna on this planet are quite dangerous. So the corporation that they had to buy insurance from in order to be able to go on this mission made them bring along a sec unit. Enter Murderbot, who doesn't want to be there, who just wants to be left alone to watch the media. And what no one knows is that these sec units are supposed to be basically automatons, not really have personalities, not really make decisions. But for whatever reason, Sec Unit was able to hack their governor module, now governs themselves, but still plays along, pretending that it is under the company's control. World building expands with each novella, but this is definitely a character-driven story focusing on Murderbot and its relationships with the people that it comes to trust and care for. I love the sense of humor. I like how she writes the fight scenes. I like how she integrates the different technologies, and I highly recommend Murderbot. Next, Daughter of the Forest This is a touching novel, historical fantasy, druidic style, medieval Ireland story following this girl named Sarah. She has 6 older brothers. Their father is a powerful chieftain in this mythical forest portion of Ireland. There are a lot of enemies between the different clan leaders, but also between Ireland and the Britons. She and her brothers are cursed by this evil sorceress. She narrowly escapes. Her brothers are turned into swans, and she is the only one who can save them. And to do that, she has to undertake this very hard, dangerous, difficult, awful task by a certain time period, and she is not allowed to speak. She gets entangled with some Britons who are on Ireland looking for someone that they care for, and their fates intertwined. It's a very emotional story. It's the first in the Seven Waters trilogy. Oh, I love her writing so much. You have to check out Daughter of the Forest. And last but not least, I would be remiss if I did not mention The Way of Kings, Book 1 of the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. I actually don't remember if when I had read this, if I had already read Mistborn. I think I had. But when I read The Way of Kings and started the Stormlight Archive, I was blown away, firstly, by the unique world-building aspects of the story, but ultimately what made me love the story and the reason why I've listened to it over and over again on audiobook is the characters, especially Kaladin. It's hard to summarize because it is an epic fantasy. In this novel, it focuses on this war that has been happening on the Shattered Plains, where the Alethi, which is one of the human type nations, have been waging war against the Parshendi, which are not human type of people, who assassinated the king. This war has been going on at first for revenge, but now it's kind of like for power, because it's a good way for these warlords to be able to make money. In the midst of that, you follow a man who was once a surgeon, once a soldier, and is now a slave, and he has been sent to the Shattered Plains to do an extremely dangerous job that's basically a suicide run. You also are following a young scholar who is desperate to become the ward and trained by one of the women who is really powerful in the Alethi kingdom. And you follow the brother to the king, who is now a powerful warlord in the society and is seeing kind of the corruption and the lack of honor among his fellows and trying to set things right. And they are all going on these journeys and kind of discovering somewhat magical powers along the way, which is a really bland way to summarize the magic system in here, but I'm not even going to try to summarize it. I just really love Kaladin's story and the depth of what he and Shallan and really all of them are going through and struggling with, set among this epic background that, you know, there's interludes in here that also give us more scope to the world building. And I really, really enjoy the series, even though I'm slow at reading it. I figure there's no hurry because there's going to be 10 of them and they're not done yet. And with that, I'm about talked out. Those are, when I think of what are my favorite novels, those are the first ones that leap to my mind. Please share with me what your favorite novels are, and if you love any of the ones that I mentioned today, and if you think that I would love any of your favorites. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. And as always, don't forget to support your local library. Thanks.